Welcome to the Charged Up Pregame Show. I'm your host, Sean Malone. I'm joined by Joe Brown, Chris Schnabel, and Jonah Rosen. We are about 30 minutes away from kickoff as the University of New Haven Chargers will be taking on the Assumption Greyhounds. The Chargers enter today's game 3-1 overall after winning 3 straight games, all in conference play. Let's talk about Ronnie Nelson. He's the star of this team now. Joe, I'm going to toss to you. Talk about Ronnie's performance throughout the season so far, but especially in last week's game against newly joining the NA10 LIU Post.
Well, Sean, the best thing that Ronnie Nelson has brought to the Chargers this year is stability. This is a year for the Chargers where they've lost a lot of seniors, and there's a lot of new guys coming up trying to prove themselves, make a name for themselves. And Ronnie Nelson's the one that has a lot of experience, and he's showing everyone how leaders should, carry themselves and help the team grow. And last week, especially against LIU, Ronnie Nelson was for passing 18 of 25 for 364 yards with 3 touchdowns. He also had a 73-yard bomb to Courtney Mashoud, which seems to be a recurring theme, long throws to Courtney Mashoud. So he's getting it all over. There's at least over half a dozen players on the Chargers that got multiple receptions, and that Ronnie Nelson also running is a threat. He's a dual-threat quarterback. He had 38 yards total, but a couple sacks, a little minor plays. He gained 60 yards, actually, on the ground. So you never know, as a defense, what Ronnie Nelson's going to do.
Now, Jonah, I'm going to talk to you about a little something. Mike DeCaro, obviously, the lead back on this team. But last week, especially in the second half, Coach Rosamondo really strayed away from giving him the ball on a handoff because it wasn't having much success. And he gave it to someone else who had a lot of success. Trevor Officer, talk about what you saw in that game.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a two-headed monster backfield. Some games it's the car running all over you. Some games it's Officer. It's going to be switching throughout the year, but Officer came up big in this game with 8 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. Pretty much all of that coming in the second half. Just a huge game for him, running out the clock for New Haven and keeping Assumption back on their toes. And, he really sealed that victory for him.
Don't forget also Anthony Tillman is a very formidable running back, too, for that team. Chris, as mentioned, they've won 3 straight now. They've been playing much better compared to their Week 1 45-14 loss against Westchester. What have you been seeing from the Charger team as a whole as the season has progressed?
Well, I mean, if you look at the team, DeCar's doing good out of the back, but the special teams is doing really good. The first play of last week, DeCar returned a kickoff for a touchdown. Another one, a big target, Michael Flacco. He had 90 yards last week and a touchdown. So it's giving a big target for Ronnie Nelson to throw to, which is always a good thing, especially in the red zone. But he's actually getting some deep balls as well, along with Hayden. But the running game, like you said, there's now 4 guys on this team, Officer Nelson, DeCaro, and Tillman, that can take the ball and actually run it for positive yards no matter what.
Yeah, this team just chock full of players who can run the ball, whether it's the quarterback or one of the many running backs that this team has. Assumption, though, Joe, has a very good 2-back system as well, the 2-mat system, as I like to call it, because they got their top 2 running backs, both averaging 5 yards per carry and both named Matt. Talk about both of those guys and what you've been seeing from them all season long and the stats that they've been putting up.
Well, Assumption's 2-2 right now, and they got a big win against American International College, AIC, for those of you who don't know, last week. And it was a big, close game, 26-23. But those 2 Matts that you're talking about, Matt Padone and Matt Harivo. Matt Padone's the main runner. He, last week against AIC, got in 22 attempts, had 92 yards. He was just a big presence out there. Matt Harivo didn't do as much, but he was still there. He had 6 attempts, 27 yards, but it doesn't seem like a lot. But he did have a 4.5 average per run and a touchdown. On the season, though, Matt Perdone is definitely the leader, has the most rushes with 75, but as a game he averages around 100 yards. And you have to put that in perspective with the quarterback too, Bobby Jordan, who is somewhat of a dual threat, not as much as Ronnie Nelson is, but he's their second leading rusher on the team along with being the quarterback.
Yeah, and you mentioned Bobby Jordan. He's not the biggest threat of a passer. Only 1 more touchdown than interception, but he can run as well. Jonah, the defense, though, for this Assumption team, they're very reliant on turnovers. That's what Coach Rosamondo said in the interview I'll be playing coming up in a few minutes. Talk about looking at the stats, what you've seen from their defense so far throughout the season.
Yeah, definitely. The turnovers have been big for this Assumption defense, considering the fact that they give up 402 yards per game, 170.8 on the ground, and 231.5 passing yards. So that'll be a big spot of exploitation that the Chargers will look to exploit. Definitely in the running game with 170 yards per game. It's a big strength of the Chargers, like we've been talking about. Look for DeCaro and Officer to have huge games.
I know you'll like this comparison, but Jim Johnson with the Eagles and his defense, his big theory was always bend but do not break, and that's what this Assumption team is doing. Chris, the Assumption team as a whole, especially in conference play, has been having a very good season, and their first conference win was a very big one as well. What have you seen from them throughout the season so far?
Well, if you look at them, they're back and forth. They lost 34-7 open up, and then they just won last week over American International 26-23. They give up more points than they score. They score about 22 points a game, and they allow 28. So if they really want to win games, obviously you have to score more points than the other team. So if you're giving up more points, you're not going to win many games. They've been giving up a lot of points, though, 34. Then they gave up 14, 41, and 23. So they need to keep the points down, get more turnovers.
When we come back, I'll play an interview that I taped earlier this week when I sat down with Chargers head coach Pete Rosamondo. You're listening to the Charged Up pregame show here on the home of the Chargers, 88.7 WNHU.